Hello and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. My name is Serge. Joining me today, I have a Nelly.
Hey, I'm here.
And a Wheeler.
What up?
A reminder that everything we do is brought to you by you, with your support over at the Patreon, over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Welcome to part one of our Murder at Karlov Manor set review. Nailed it in one.
Murders.
No one tell him.
Murders, plural?
Yeah.
How many people died?
At least
Multiple.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was a bloodbath.
Oh.
A reminder for our set reviews that these are not exhaustive. We do not talk about every single card, only the ones that we think are interesting or that we think that you'll ask us a lot of questions about. We've also added one card from the Commander product.
Yeah.
And did any other cards from the supplementary make it into the Clue product? Or
One card from Cluedo.
Okay.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
what the Brits call it.
Ooh. So we'll point those cards out when we get there. But yeah, I'm pretty excited about this set. So let's start off with Wheeler. Take it away.
Assemble the players. 1 and a white for an enchantment. You may look at the top card of your library any time. And once each turn, you may cast a spell with power 2 or less from the top of your library. Creature spell. This is an interesting card. I like being able to cast stuff off the top of my library.
Yeah.
Who doesn't love a future sight?
Oh my God.
Especially a future sight that can work with little dorky white creatures and potentially ruin somebody's evening. The issue is that, one, it's only once per turn. Two, it's not every single creature. Like, it's not like an Elven Chorus style card. And then including these cards in your deck means that you either have to cut a non-creature card, which is usually utility or removal, and those slots are fairly tight-knit, right? Like, we're not getting that much better than Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile in mono white, so which one of these am I cutting for this card? Or you have to cut a creature, which makes this worse because you have fewer creatures in your deck. That said, it's 2 mana. 2 mana is not a lot of mana. You know, I think that it's an interesting card for maybe a green-white or a mono-white kind of ruin your evening style deck. Maybe you get a bunch of Soul Sisters in there and you're just doing some really annoying stuff. Maybe a Safi Eriksdottir loop, that kind of thing. But I tend to shy away from these cards. It falls into this camp of, if you give it a whirl, it's probably not going to be that embarrassing to play.
Yeah.
But it's not what even though it's like, it goes into the decks that I like, I don't think it's the kind of card that I would personally play.
There's the scales of power level to cost to inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And this is so perfectly balanced. You're like, I don't want to not play it, but I also don't want to play it.
Yeah, if I was playing one of these decks at a weekly event, I would give this card a whirl. If I was forced to play one of those decks at like a top 8, I would not be including it. You know?
What do you think about it in Death and Taxes?
Nope.
People must be wondering.
Nope.
It doesn't make the cut,
Get it out.
right?
The deck is too competitive.
Yeah.
The card quality is too high.
Yeah.
Like, are you going to cut Thalia? I mean, like,
Well-
no, but you know what I mean.
Well, it's the
Yeah.
darndest thing. They keep printing all these 2 mana 3 power creatures that find themselves in that deck. So it also just doesn't cast. It doesn't cast those cards, and it doesn't cast like your big, like, oh, they're dead kind of
the
cards.
finishers. I didn't mean to attack you there, by the way.
No,
Yeah.
I wanted to give you one of those
Yeah, no,
commentary
for sure.
questions. You're good. I have one more judge question, actually. Can I cast a Grist off the top of my library with this?
Yeah.
I think so, right? 2 or less?
It's a creature.
power
It
is
has
0,
no
right?
power.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So, I don't know, maybe like an Abzan deck that's trying to creature combo with Safi Eriksdottir. Like, that could...
I could see a
Could see-
really bad Sandy B list.
I was about
Yeah.
to say, or like a Lurin or something.
Yeah.
If Luris is in your deck, this sort of seems like it fits a little
That's
bit. I
kinda
know
cute.
Luris is 3 power.
Yeah.
I know, but the people that Luris
Yeah.
likes, this
Yeah.
card likes too.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on.
It's time to call a surprise witness. 1 and a white for a sorcery. Return target creature with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a flying counter on it. It's a spirit in addition to its other types. So in the world of recommissions, and we had the 1 mana one from
Helping Hand.
Ixalan, Helping Hand, exactly. Obviously, this is a space that R&D is playing with a bunch, and white live out of your graveyard / ruin your evening again gets to enjoy yet another fun little toy with a flying counter, and it becomes
Love
a
it.
spirit.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there's someone out there that can't wait to turn their non-spirit creature with mana value 3 or less
Spooky
into a spirit.
Luris?
Sure. Spooky Luris. This one brings Luris back so that you can then bring back your other annoying garbage.
And then, does Luris bring this back?
No, only permanents for Luris. Right?
Oh, right. It's a
Luris
Why did I
only.
think that was an aura? Never mind. Derp.
Although we must be headed that direction, right? Like pretty soon they're going to give us seal of recommission because they have to keep
Right?
Like this is just one of the
Don't do it.
stop.
Don't do it.
Shut it down.
This
shut
is
it
a
down.
family show.
All right. Let's
Anyways, I give this one a B+. I don't know. Like, yeah, play it. It's fine. Like, anything else to say?
No,
It's fine.
we'll
Let's
move
move
on.
on. Yep.
All right, introducing our first case. Case of the Uneaten Feast. Now, Cased is a new enchantment type. Kind of looks like a saga, but it's not a saga. Basically, there's two mechanics here. There's to solve, which is a condition, and there's the solved. Solved is a state. A case is either solved or it's not. So once it has been solved, you get the rest. Anyways, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. You get this ability forever. Before it's solved, after it's solved, that always does that. To solve, gain 5 or more life this turn. And then, once it's solved, you may sacrifice this case. Creature cards in your graveyard gain. You may cast this card from your graveyard until end of turn. It's 1 mana. This is awesome. You know what Ben Wheeler hates? It's when his soul sisters die.
I'll get them back.
Well, with this, you can.
Mhm.
The cost to include is very low. It does a great job of being a soul sister. It has a little bit more protection than your creatures do, but it synergizes with all of that. It's very, very easy to gain 5 or more life in a turn, and you can sacrifice it to do awful things like bring back your Children of Koilos 1 more time. Now, mind you, this card doesn't loop because you do sacrifice it. You get 1 big payoff turn, but it's kind of all you need.
Yeah, if you sacrifice it, like if it changes zones, then it's no longer solved if it comes back, so you can't do an immediate kind of.
Sure, that's true. You can loop it in that respect. It does reset
But
afterwards. Yeah.
you know, sacrificing this, casting my Luris, and then casting this off Luris is kind of hot.
Yep. Yep.
I was already kind of experimenting with a version of Ruin Your Evening that also dipped into playing some enchantments with like Hall of Heliod's Generosity, the symbol of his church, being a kind of a cool utility land. And yeah, this card's annoying as hell. Very excited to play that.
Hate it. Hate it.
Mhm.
Let's move on. Wheeler.
Delny Streetwise Lookout. 2 and a white for a 2/2 legendary human scout. Creatures you control with power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures with power 3 or greater. If an ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. And that's not limited to once per turn. Now, Serge, you have evenings. You have an evening, right?
I have a bunch
You got
of
a couple
free
of them this
evenings.
week? Like, what,
Just-
7?
Just sitting there to be ruined? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah. It's there are some downsides to this card.
Yeah.
Not to be a bit of a poopy pants, but it is a 3-mana legend with 2 toughness technically without an ETB
Yeah.
itself. So it is kind of Caracas food. Or just dying to a shock is not exactly the most exciting thing to think about when I'm paying 3 mana for a card. Thankfully, we've just talked about a couple of cards that can bring this back from the graveyard that archetype's already playing. And yeah, this lets you push damage in a deck that technically you have to kill your opponent at some time. Or you could just keep generating more life, more clue tokens, more draws off your Welcoming Vampire, whatever. That might be about, I think, some of them say like they can only trigger once each turn, which this doesn't
Interesting.
work with this, right? This says that ability triggers an additional time instead of copying
I'd have to look
the
it up.
ability.
I'd have to look it up explicitly, but typically no beats yes is like a good
Yeah.
is a good magic rule.
Yes,
If something
yeah.
says no, then something the ability that says yes doesn't get to, right?
And that's a great way of summarizing this card. No beats? Question mark? Yes, because if you can't get your little creatures through, now you can, which is kind of nice.
If I may, this might be one of the cheapest Panharmonicon effects we've had as well. Because it's normally 4, the new Elish Norn is 5 and stuff like that. So although it is restrictive and on a a pretty vulnerable body, that's a pretty powerful effect at 3 mana.
Yeah, and it has a stat line, both in its mana cost and its power and toughness, that make it easier to recover with the cards that we mentioned, but also stuff like Revelark, which means that if you want to swap Elishnorn for this card to get that extra Panharmonicon effect, you are shaving off your top end, which makes including cards like Revelark a little bit of an easier sell.
like Imperial Recruiter, man.
Yeah, I mean, recruiters are pretty hot.
Yeah.
It's only 3 out of the 7 mana you spend with Protean Hulk, or 6 mana you spend with Protean Hulk, right?
My one downside, very quick downside for this though, is something I've been thinking about with a lot with Highlander. Is it necessary? Like, do you need this card?
Right. Yeah.
And because it is 3 mana, that's not nothing. And so maybe there are decks where like you could imagine this card being really good in like an Allurin deck or a food chain or a Kiki Pod kind of deck, but like those decks don't need this card to do a thing, and it might be a little unnecessary. But obviously, it's a mythic rare, so it's got to be pretty good.
Must be.
Just
right?
might not be.
That's the rule.
Yeah, might not be good enough.
Well, maybe we can find another card that might be good enough, and maybe we'll even hit a card that doesn't go into ruin your evening.
No.
It's possible.
All right.
right?
And then coming up is
No.
It's Doorkeeper Thrall. 1 and a white for a 1/2 with flash, flying, and artifacts and creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger. Hooray! We're off Ruin Your Evening finally.
I got bad news for you. We ruined one person's evening.
Oh, it's the Ruin Your Evening player. Yeah, no, honestly, this is extremely hateful, and it ruins, obviously, Blink decks. It stuffs your opponent's Stoneforge Mystic. It, like, stops pretty much the entire venture into the dungeon / initiative mechanic. The list obviously goes on and on. Artifacts and creatures with enter the battlefield triggers attached to them are most of the ones we like to play.
Yeah.
So Doorkeeper Thrall really is just, a counterspell that sticks around and keeps counterspelling, like, I don't know, 3/4 of the creatures that Canadian Highlander players prefer. So you're going to see this thing across the table a fair bit, and probably will make the cut in Death and Taxes.
Yes.
I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, someone's going to have to move over for Doorkeeper Thrall.
We've received cards similar to this before, but this is the first time it's like, no, this is playable.
Yes.
Yeah.
It having flash is absurd.
And flying, like
Yeah.
two
yeah.
points that push it above. I mean, Hushbringer has flying,
Yeah.
but like Tocatli, but like it's a 1/2. Tocatli Honor Guard, it's a human, has 3 toughness, but that's all it's got. This one checks off. Like, I don't know, just slapping a GT on this idiot, or like a Skull Clamp or whatever.
Yeah.
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 Fire.
Yeah.
Good.
It might be one of the strongest cards in the set, like, actually.
You're going to see it.
Yeah. All right, next up, we have the Novice Inspector, a 1 mana 1/2 human detective for a single white pip. When it enters the battlefield, investigate. Now, this might seem kind of familiar to some people because it's a functional reprint of Thraben Inspector. Good, I nailed that part. And some people might still be sleeping on Thraben Inspector. This card is gas. This card, it's really weird that, a 1 mana common, 1 mana 1/2 common with a clue token is that big, but it has seen play in top tier lists. It saw play in the last Highlander top 8, the white blue artifact list that was it? Who brought it? Davey B. Davey B piloted, and getting this is what you look for in singleton formats, is this kind of density, these types of functional reprints that let you get more of a certain effect if you're looking for it. So 2 thumbs up from me.
Redundancy lower on the curve is always
Yes.
welcome.
We don't need another 6-drop that does the same thing.
Yeah, it's and I gotta tell you, I was really high on Inspector.
Yep.
Then I was lower on Inspector. But now that I've been playing more Vintage Cube lately, and just like playing with more Thraben Inspector, I'm coming around. I'm like, yeah, this card. Should we have just been playing this card like the
think so.
entire
I
time?
think so.
I
Yeah.
think we were supposed to be playing more
for
Thraben Inspector in the
real.
past.
Yeah.
It just makes keeping a hand so much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does so much to help you keep a hand.
Yeah, it's smoothing out your whole curve. All of a sudden, you've got so many uses for your mana for the first 4 turns. Woo.
Beautiful.
All right, next up, Wheeler.
All right, I'll try to not talk about this card for 20 minutes, but it is oh my god, Unyielding Gatekeeper. 1 and a white for a 3/2 Elephant Cleric with Disguise for 1 and a white. So if you don't know what Disguise is, remember Morph? It's back, but with Ward 2, because this is in 2024. You pay 3 generic to cast this card face down as a 2/2 colorless creature with Ward 2, and then you can turn it face up for its disguise cost, and you can do this as a special action. Doesn't use the stack. And it says, when Unyielding Gatekeeper is turned face up, exile another target non-land permanent. If you controlled it, return it to play tapped. Otherwise, its controller creates a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. Okay. 2 mana 3/2 is good.
Yes.
White or white-green, which is where you're going to want to play this card, has excess mana, especially in the first couple of turns. So playing this for the disguise cost ahead of the curve, or just like playing it on rate, is totally fine. That's a thing your deck can fulfill, and that's okay. You can get it set up. Ward 2, annoying as hell. You're not going to pay 3 mana for a lightning bolt. Who are you kidding?
Especially in the first.
Especially the first couple of turns.
Yeah.
Also, great with equipment. Like, you could just have this face down, slap on equipment to it, and your opponent can't deal with it. Also pretty good in these white X decks. Then let's get to the part where we're turning this face up, because that's a cheap cost. Like 2 mana to flip it up.
1 and a white.
Pretty cheap cost for a morph. You can protect your own permanents, and it's non-land. It's not just creature. You can protect your own permanents. You can reset ETBs. You can flicker planeswalkers that are being attacked by your opponent. Resetting the initiative sounds pretty good. Just get a new clue token. Whatever. It honestly doesn't matter. Or you can muck your opponent's best card. You can trade up in mana by just like paying, you pay this 2 and you exile their 4-drop, and now they have a dorky little 2/2 creature. Like, what are we doing here?
Why
This
is
card-
Resto Angel also Skyclave Apparition?
This card rules.
I was about to say, like, does this just replace Skyclave Apparition in most of our decks now?
Here's the best part. You play them both.
We were just talking about density and redundancy, right?
Yeah, at low cost.
Yeah.
And not just mana, low cost of inclusion.
Yes.
Because it's just like, it's a 2 mana. There's a card from the Innistrad sets, Sun Gold Sentinel. It's a 2 mana 3/2 ETB and attack. You exile cards in the graveyard, and then it has an ability that gives it hexproof and makes it difficult to block Coven. But for one particular color. But I'm skipping over what this card does exactly, because most of the time it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's just a 2 mana 3/2.
You're just getting 3/2 beats, and you're like, and this has upside? That's not fair.
Yeah. So this card is aggressive, it's cheap, it's flexible in how you play it, and it's flexible in how you use its ability. It's wild. I think this card might like it. Go.
Yeah, it's a good card.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Wojak Investigator. Another pretty solid include here. 2 and a white for a 2/4 flying vigilance, angel detective. At the beginning of your upkeep, investigate once for each opponent who has more cards in hand than you. Okay, so that's not too difficult of a condition to meet, depending on the matchup. Obviously, if your opponent is just as aggro ham with the small creatures as you are, then maybe you won't be investigating. But in that situation, the fact that you played a 3 mana 2/4 flying vigilance is probably extra relevant. So you're going to be pretty happy with Wojak Investigator, whether you're losing on making clues or you're, winning at drawing an extra card every turn. Like, whichever matchup you're in, you're pretty well suited.
Yeah. Yeah.
This guy's very solid.
Yeah.
I just love that it has 4 toughness, because it does such a great job of shutting down Vendilion Clique, Brazen Boar, just so many.
Taking the initiative back.
Yeah. I mean, with Vigilance, defending the initiative as well.
Yes.
It soaks up a hit from Minsk and Boo. I mean, it dies, but
But
it's not nothing.
you not dying
Yeah,
is like a plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, real quick, what deck do you think it goes into? Or plural, decks?
Damn it, Serge.
I know. We're looking at like an objectively good card, and I'm just like, I don't know where I'm
Look,
going to
Boros
play
Initiative
this.
tries it.
There might be some people at home that are sick and tired of hearing ruin your evening.
Yeah.
Although ruin your initiative is not that bad of a name for the deck.
Ruin Your Initiative is such a good deck.
Maybe that's going to be a version of this deck.
Ooh.
Yeah.
But like, the deck was already reasonable before, and now it's just getting like 2 to 3 new cards every single set. That's kind of, keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll move on to blue cards then, and just leave the question of Wojak Investigator to the comments. All right. We got Case of the Filched Falcon. I beg your pardon. That's a word. Single blue mana. When this case enters the battlefield, investigate. So create a clue token. To solve, control 3 or more artifacts. Not bad. Solved. 2 and a blue and sack the case. Put 4 +1/+1 counters on target non-creature artifact. It becomes a 0/0 bird creature with flying in addition to its other types. If you are a blue deck that likes to play artifacts, of which pretty straightforward to do in a lot of these decks, it seems like a fairly straightforward inclusion. You really want to be the type of blue deck that wants to kill your opponents through damage, though. So I like this in probably that Davy B blue-white artifact deck they were talking about before. So 1 mana gives you the clue, gives you the same sort of smoothed out curve as sort of a Thraben Inspector, pardon me, except it doesn't attack or block. You're really looking for that artifact synergy. This looks great with decks that enjoy constructs and are also playing a lot of other utility artifacts. Mana rocks. Trying to think of other examples of artifacts. Equipment. I mean, I don't know. There's definitely that play where you turn your GT into a creature to swing for lethal. That feels pretty good, but it's always kind of an odd one.
That's a nice thing is that you get to use this on whatever you need at the given time.
Yeah. This is not what we would call a sexy card, but I think this is a really good role player. Like I would recommend, this is probably a card that people are going to sleep on that might way outperform what you think it's going to be doing.
You want to talk sexy?
Yes.
Okay.
No, are you moving on to another card?
No, I'm talking about this. Okay. I'm talking about this. What are certain lands that you're only playing in these decks? The artifact lands, right? Now, it just so happens...
There's the indestructible artifact land!
Yeah. So if I'm loading up a Darksteel Citadel and making it a 4/4 indestructible flying creature... That's pretty hot.
Yeah,
that's
dude.
Look, I have Insolnithoptered once or twice in my day. Even in Highlander, it feels good.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And you get to do that while also just drawing a card.
Yeah. Wheeler.
Yeah.
Just because it hasn't been mentioned yet, comparison to Thraben Inspector is really good, obviously. There's also the 1 mana sorcery from Modern Horizons that makes
hard evidence.
Hard evidence. So like instead of blocking for the first couple turns with your 0/3 crab, this card that puts 2 permanents onto the battlefield can either attack on the Darksteel lands we were talking about, or this doesn't say you control. If you have a creature removal and you need to take out your opponent's paradox engine, bang! Now it's a bird.
We can cut that.
If I may, one last question. All that glitters. Is it just artifacts or is it enchantments and artifacts?
And enchantment.
Just saying. Okay. Just saying.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to the next case here, Wheeler.
I don't want people to know that they can animate my paradox engine. Leave me alone.
Incredible.
I want those sword splashers in their hand dead. The next card is Case of the Ransacked Lab. 2 and a blue for an enchantment case. Instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. To solve, you've cast 4 or more instants and sorcery spells this turn. And when it's solved, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, draw a card. So to solve this card is genuinely not, like, it's not that easy.
No.
It sounds, everybody gets it in their brain of like, oh, cantrip, kill your thing, draw a card, or, a ritual or whatever. Yeah. And it's just like, no, that's not how that goes. You're going to cantrip into 2 lands.
Yeah.
You're going to be really mad, or you're going to be short on mana. It might happen occasionally if you set up for that. But even then, it's not really like a storm deck isn't doing that. Like a storm deck isn't throwing a bunch of setup in one turn to get this payoff and then continuing to reap the benefits. 3 mana though for a like instant and sorcery are now reduced.
Yeah, Goblin Electromancer, right?
Yeah, a Goblin Electromancer effect that isn't going to get hit by Fatal Push. At 3 mana is pretty neat. Like that's a reasonable rate just for that. And yeah, you know what? High Tide players are already just kind of messed up. So they might they could play this. Like I can't really see many spots where this card is going to show up.
You like High Tide, you probably don't like Storm.
Don't like it in Storm, but if you're playing High Tide, like just casting this on 3, untapping, and then like trying to win the game.
High Tide feels like such a more chaotic deck than Storm anyways. You're like, come on, please. I just need to blue Sun Zenith myself one more time, bro.
Yeah.
Just one more time.
High Tide is wild because it's both harder than Storm. It's harder than Storm. It's worse than Storm. And it's just more volatile than Storm. You're just
Sure.
like, oh, I draw 7 into nothing. Womp womp.
If it hasn't become clear to you already from everything else that my friends have said, it's just if you hit the condition of solving this case in Canadian Highlander, you either already won during your main phase or you're dead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter that you solved it. You passed your opponent and didn't kill them. And even though you could draw a card if you rip an instant off the top next turn, your odds
Your
of
hand
going
is
off
empty. Yeah.
again
Yeah.
are very, very,
Yeah.
very low.
Yeah. Blue-red spells. Like blue-red Pyromancer.
I don't think so.
3 mana.
Just you.
We'll
I need a Goblin Electromancer
Yeah.
that flies from Count
Yeah.
Gowan instead.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. We've got Conspiracy Unraveler. It's 5 generic blue. So a 7 mana Sphinx Detective, a 6/6 with flying that says you may collect evidence 10, which means to exile 10 mana value worth of cards from your graveyard, rather than pay the mana cost for spells that you cast. So this is an interesting one. We've got a creature that gives you a... It's not quite omniscience, but it does give you a chance to cast free spells from your hand, free with an asterisk that you have to exile a bunch of stuff from your graveyard. I see this as a potentially playable card in like an Angel of Glory's Rise, mill yourself situation, and then you reanimate this, and then you've got a full graveyard, and then you somehow turn that into... you won the game. Obviously, in the situation of Angels of Glory's Rise that I just described, like, we've already got a deck that can do that and win the game, but maybe if you need to win the game differently, you're doing this. Go ahead.
Oath of Druids.
Oath of Druids. Okay, so Oath of Druids also mills yourself a whole bunch. You can hit this, and now you've got an Omniscience off your Oath of Druids. I like that. It's an option.
Mhm.
It means that you now need to win with the cards in your hand rather than the trigger from your Oath of Druids target or whatever, but... you know, there's some room to play there.
Yeah, this is not a... It's weird to think about. This is the spark that starts a fire, right? Like that, trying to think about what this card does. Like, this is not
It's an
going to
enabler.
win. Yeah, you've already got the pieces that you need. Maybe a way to think about this is like, remember when Sandra Bullock got like new ways to discard cards or something like that? Like, you get that one little piece and it changes something that's already together.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's what I'm thinking of this as. Like, it's this weird little... It might just flip a switch that didn't quite exist before, but I don't know.
It does something unique.
Yes, this card is different. This is a new effect that we have never seen before.
Yeah.
You may collect evidence 10 rather than pay the mana cost for spells you cast. And so I guess we've included on the list as a nod to like, hey,
This is cool.
groovy combo brewers, we're looking at you. Show
Yeah.
us what you got. You know?
I do think that outside of examples where you just mill your entire deck or most of your deck, collecting evidence is... I'm going to lean on it being a lot more difficult than people assume it will be,
Sure.
especially 10.
10.
Like,
Collect evidence 4, sure.
think about it. How many lands do you delve
Sure.
when you
Yeah.
cast that Treasure Cruise? You're
Yeah.
getting rid of like 2
Yeah.
lands there.
How
And
cheap are your spells in Canadian Highlander?
very cheap.
Yeah.
Well, unless, of course, you are the Delve deck and you've got these like 7 mana, 8 mana cards in your deck already. 'Cause
Yeah.
That's what Delve does.
And
you know?
dredge too, like anything where it's like you're just putting stuff in your graveyard
Yeah.
on purpose.
Reanimator. That's one
Yeah.
card.
Yeah. that's
Yeah.
right. Almost, yeah.
All right, let's move on. Next up, we have the Curious Inquiry. I pronounced curious right, but not
Inquiry.
inquiry.
Yes.
Sure.
1 mana aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, investigate. So we have another version of Curiosity here. This is worse than Staggering Insight, which is probably my favorite of them all. I mean, Staggering Insight, you have to attack each turn. Now, the upside to this is you get an artifact, which is very powerful. We've sung the praises of artifacts on this show, on this podcast for dozens of episodes now. That's all.
Yes.
I don't know.
This artwork is just me with my Flying Men deck sleeved up beside me, thinking about whether or not I'm wasting my night if I go play this at
So-
the Monday night tournament.
I would argue that this is worse than every Curiosity, But if you're already playing every curiosity, you probably also want to play this. And you have some potential upside and some potential synergies if you have something with clue tokens or you care about artifacts. But I do think this is worse than the other curiosities. I think this is curiosity number 4 now.
Yeah, you're playing Curious Obsession,
Yeah.
Combat, Research, and Curiosity first. Those are the 3. 1 blue, they're drawing you cards when you hit them.
Yeah.
And then Staggering Insight if you're on white.
Yeah.
But the decks that you play those effects in are tight on mana all the time. And so
Absolutely.
the additional mana for the clues can be a little
Also
tricky.
really awkward. Yeah.
And like they also tend to just be these absolutely like just the rudest kind of tempo strategies where they're like eviscerating their own hand to get any kind of presence on the board. And if you're not immediately refilling with the curiosities, then you're falling behind. So yeah, it's tough to say no to one of these. But
Yeah, you said it's worse for all these reasons, and I'm 100% winning in Flying Man, right?
The other reason for that too is that deck is often holding up a lot of counter magic or instant speed disruption, so you do have that opportunity during your opponent's end step to crack a clue, but not having that counter spell already in your hand is a major.
Do you know how bad it feels when you're like, okay, I got 2 creatures in play, 2 weird birds in play, and I got 2 mana in this counter spell. My opponent just passes. Ooh, I can crack a clue, and they're like, all right, in response, I'll kill your thing. And you go, oh.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because then you got to play something on your stupid main phase again, or just like hold up another weird idiot bird, and it just spirals out of control.
Fair.
I think as long as it's 1 mana for these kinds of auras that somehow feel like curiosity, you're going to keep playing them until there's like 10. Because just having something where it's like, okay, my stupid Flying Man gets a little more value than 1 damage.
Also gets +1/+1. That's huge
That's
in the
not-
stupid Flying Man
it's not
deck,
nothing.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like it matters.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Wheeler.
Oh, it's Forensic Gadgeteer. 2 in a blue for 2/3 Videlkin Artificer Detective, which has possibly one of my favorite lines of text in the whole set. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, investigate.
Oh my God, it's so good.
And then activated abilities of artifacts you control cost 1 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana of the cost to less than 1 mana. So, here's a couple of things. 1, this is an artifact. This is a creature that when you cast artifacts, you make additional artifacts. Traditionally, those have been broken. You know, Psymaster Thopterist
Yep.
kills a lot of people. 2, those clues now cost 1 less to sacrifice. Clues are already pretty strong in these decks because, well, for one, they're just adding a bunch of artifacts, which makes your Tolarian Academy a lot better. But also with cards like Urza, Lord High Artificer, where you can tap them to add mana and then use that mana to sack the clue, because the clue doesn't have to be untapped to sacrifice. So with Urza, Lord High Artificer in this card, these clues are just free. It just says whenever you cast an artifact spell, draw a card, which is itself busted. There are cards that say that, but they often cost 4 mana and they're on like a 0/1 body, or they're in a different color, or they're a legend or whatever. And I know it sounds like, well, great. How do we break this card? We play it with Urza. That's, but like
Hooray,
this,
we broke Urza.
This card's just going to pop off
Yeah.
casting
Yeah, it is.
whatever cheap artifact you have.
Yeah.
Not to mention, it just goes infinite with Basalt Monolith as well. Right?
Yeah.
You tap Basalt for 3,
that's
use
one,
2 to
yeah,
untap.
yeah.
Like, this card is great.
think
I
it-
am so here for it.
It really likes walking ballista in situations where you didn't go infinite before you cast it.
Mhm.
And then it also is just like so sweet next to the Rings of Brighthearth. Anytime you're like doing a Rings of Brighthearth thing that isn't already infinite, it's like, yeah, now you're quicker to like go off and draw 2 cards with your Sensei's Divine Top or whatever. All these really stupid things that just are the situations you end up in the heavy artifact mono blue deck.
Yeah.
When you didn't win on like turn 3,
Lot-
but you're still
cracked.
playing.
Yeah.
It's like these cards are great in those situations.
A lot of these scenarios sound like nonsense or Magical Christmas Land, but just that's the nature of these decks that have such heavy draw velocity.
Yeah.
Like they just churn through their deck. They will find these pieces, then they grab a tutor. And if you know what to spot, you will be like, oh, I have rings and this card, and my Basalt Monolith is already gone. Well, I'll find Grim Monolith and then go infinite that way.
Right.
Yep.
Which is just, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's an Artificer.
So you're gonna have a lot of fun with it.
Cavern of Souls is real, people.
A lot of the Artifact Matters cards often have like massive downsides for the engine pieces. Like even the simple ones, the 2-mana 2/1 that whenever you cast an artifact, if you pay 1, you can draw a card.
Yeah.
Right? Like, is it just loot?
Oh, maybe I'm thinking of a different one.
Yeah.
Sorry, the Smith from Scars of Mirror.
That's Riddlesmith.
Or
Or
if they-
that one's free, right?
Or they feel, or it's like Unctus, right? You're
Right.
like, this seems really cool and really neat, and maybe there's an upside. Is it powerful? You're like, no, this card's just cracked.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
card's real.
This might be in sort of like the top 5 most powerful artifact cards I can think of.
I mean,
Artifact Matter cards. I'll clarify. Blue creatures that care about artifacts.
no, you heard him first. Pearl, Jet, Sapphire, Emerald, Ruby.
Lotus.
Lotus.
Yeah.
Sorry, because we're talking about like Urza and Sai, and then you're like, yeah, I think in that list, like
Yeah.
putting it
Yeah.
beside those cards already. Oh man,
Yeah.
So
big-
kudos to this one for not getting bounced to Caracas.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And
That's
like-
pretty big.
And to get 2-3 for 3 on these abilities, I feel like
Yeah.
that's pushed. Like we
Oh my
probably would
God,
still
yeah.
be singing the praise of this card if they gave us a 1-2 for 3,
yeah.
right? Like
the
even
scales start to
more,
even out a little
more
bit
than
more at that
one
point.
toughness on these
Yeah.
abilities. I think I'd still be like, yeah, you're gonna play it.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay,
All right,
moving
Nelly,
on.
you're up.
It's time to talk about Intrude on the Mind. 3 blue, a 5-mana instant. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library, and you separate them into 2 piles. An opponent chooses one of those piles. Put that pile into your hand, and the other into your graveyard. Create a 0/0 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. Then put a +1/+1 counter on it for each card put into your graveyard this way. So, really interesting Fact or Fiction kind of card. Reminds me a little bit of that 6-mana one that was uncounterable. I forget what it was called though, but it amasses.
Oh,
You draw 2.
Commence the end game.
Commence the end game. Yeah, sort of like a 5-mana commence the end game. Doesn't have uncounterable, but the draw effect is a bit more powerful too. Now, typically, if you need to make the piles and then your opponent gets to pick, that's bad. It's worse than when they make the piles and you get to pick for sure. But this one can kind of make up for it in that, you know, the Thopter creature might be like quite scary. Like if you just, you know, you see the card you want the most, and then you put the other 4 cards in another pile, your opponent has to now choose whether like let you have your cake and a 4/4 Thopter, or let you have 4 cards for 5 mana, which probably you're going to be able to do something useful with as well. So if you're willing to play Jace's Ingenuity, I would definitely give this one a try, just because it creates a lot of difficult scenarios for your opponent. And still, even though they get to pick, it gives them room to mess up.
That's way better than Jace's Ingenuity. This card is
Sure.
yeah.
Well, yeah. Importantly, Steam Augury. Don't think of this as fact or fiction.
Sure.
Right? We covered it. I've seen what the unwashed masses do when this card's put in front of them. They think it's FOF. It's not.
No. The opponent
yeah.
picks. You make.
Yeah.
I
What's
wanted
wrong
to
with
say that
Fact or
really
Fiction?
slowly.
That's one of the greatest draw spells of all time.
Don't you what's wrong with fact or fiction? Me. I VOTFOFYL'd way
Right?
more than.
Right?
I'm not bashing fact or fiction. I'm bashing Steam Augury.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's important. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I tried to say it real slowly. But
Yes.
yeah, you make the piles and they choose. So that's what we're
Yes.
starting with here.
Yes.
But like, if you take Steam Augury, this is like they're trying to really give Steam Augury a glow up.
They're trying to make it playable.
Yeah, exactly. You get a creature no matter what, unless all 5 cards went to your hand, which is legal.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, the 5/0 stack, you're like,
Sure.
pick your poison.
Yeah, maybe your opponent's dead to a 5/5.
You get a 5/5 flying creature with
This-
flash?
Yeah, it's not a sorcery. Yeah.
Feels like a card that would benefit not for the sake of the game, but for an understanding of it. If it was rewritten to be like, choose one, get your best card in your hand and a 4/4 flyer at instant speed,
Right.
or like get 2 really good cards and a 3/3 flyer. So just like flash Muldrifter that's bigger,
Yeah.
and then a 2/2 draw 3 okay cards 1/1, just draw 4 cards. Like 5 mana, make a blocker, draw 4.
Yeah.
It's just hot.
Every version of this card's pretty exciting.
Yes.
Right? When you look at it, unless literally the top 5 cards of your library are garbage, in which case, yeah, maybe make the 5-0 split. Make your opponent choose.
And you
then
know-
get a 5/5 flyer.
I got a system. It's not a good one, but this is one that I picked up recently. This card's a mythic rare, and that's not a good indicator of the power level of a card necessarily. But on an effect like this, why do you put this at mythic? Because they believe that this
question.
card is a lot better than it looks, right?
Okay.
Like,
Oh yeah, this card 100% is destroying people in draft, and that's one of the reasons I think. do
they
it,
destroy people in draft at rare.
Yeah,
Why you make this a mythic? Because people are going to need 4 of this card for standard or
Right.
whatever,
Sure.
and it just kills people dead. Yeah.
Fun story spotlight moment. We Alquist Prof's mind is being intruded on here, and we don't know who that cloaked figure is. Yeah. Okay, moving on.
Next up, we have Reenact the Crime. 4 mana instant for 1 blue, blue, blue. My god, that's Cryptic Commands mana. Exile target non-land card in a graveyard that was put there from anywhere this turn. Copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost.
I don't remember this card.
I think
It's
this is
very
the most
funny.
raw, powerful card in the set.
Do you?
Yeah.
I'm kind of medium on this card.
Okay.
You're
Oh,
looking,
yeah.
You're looking at me like you're crazy.
Oh, I just want to let you say
So
your piece.
my,
Yeah.
my issue with this card is you either, I don't know, how do you set it up? Like on
Faithless
board-
Looting.
Somebody else take it away. All right, tell me why this card's good.
Sorry, you just faithless looting your omniscience into the bin, and then you make a copy of it for 4 mana.
So that's like 2 cards and 5 mana. I don't know. That's the part that's weird,
Okay.
right? Like,
So,
Like, say
okay.
you win the game for those 2 cards and 5 mana. Yeah.
So it's so easy to get cards into the graveyard and to do so under your own volition, right? Like, if you are a deck that is playing this card, then chances are the rest of your deck is going to be well equipped to put not just cards in general into your graveyard, but the cards that you want in the graveyard into the graveyard.
I didn't think of this as Reanimator.
Yeah. it's
But
a random.
but here's
I
the
didn't
best
think-
part
okay.
is that it can go with reanimation, but it's even bigger than that.
Yeah.
It's
no,
large.
No.
It's
Okay, no, I'm sold now. I skimmed this card and I undervalued it.
Oh yeah, it's
No, I
it's
get it
also
now. Yeah.
instant speed makeshift
Yes.
mannequin to get your Eldrazi in play if you want. Like you can entome your Emrakul and then
Yeah, like
and
it
then
works better than like
cast
a
the
Goryu's
copy.
Vengeance.
You
Yeah.
get to cast your Emrakul.
get- Yeah.
I'm going to play this card in Omnitel.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's a shoe in
Yeah.
an Omnitel, but
Yeah.
I also think that if you're not 4-color Reanimator, which most decks aren't, I know 3 blue is a lot for a Reanimator, but probably it's worth trying.
Yeah, and it has the flexibility of being able to hit your opponent's graveyard too, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a card in a graveyard.
That's
okay.
that's the thing too. Like any
Yeah.
deck that feels like it can handle the casting cost, anytime your opponent casts a sorcery, unless it makes you discard this card, then you can at least respond and get back at them with the same sorcery.
Oh my god. Playing
Yeah.
this against Seeker Walk is going to be so funny. Where if they just they have their Time Walk in their graveyard, or they've cast their Time Walk and
Yeah,
they're
like
like,
you
okay,
cast
go to
your-
my next
Yeah,
turn. You're like,
yeah.
hold on. I go to my turn first.
Did that time walk go to your graveyard from another zone this turn?
Oh my god. All right. Okay. No.
Cards like this that are just also splash graveyard hate.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I don't hate just being like, oh, you wanted to Snapcaster your Lightning Bolt?
It's my
Nope.
lightning bolt.
I'm going
now.
to Snapcaster your Lightning Bolt.
Sick. Shall we move on to Black Wheeler?
Sure. It's the case of the stashed skeleton. 1 in a black for an enchantment case. When it ETBs, you make a 2/1 skeleton token and you suspect it. When a card is suspected, it has menace and can't block. And that is like a status, much like how monstrous
Yep.
is kind of a status. To solve this case, you control no suspected skeletons. Very good line of text.
Fantastic sentence.
And when it's solved, you pay 1 in a black, sacrifice this case, Demonic Tutor, only as a sorcery. Now, Nelson,
Yeah.
you've played a lot of really bad black creatures, right?
So many. If they make a bad black creature, I'll generally try it. Yeah.
Like a 2 mana, 2 power menace creature is not even that bad.
This isn't even in the pantheon.
Yeah,
It
like
doesn't even do
Like-
damage
like
to each
2
turn.
mana, 2/1 can't block common. I would menace. I would be like, hey, we got to talk about this one.
Yeah.
It's only 2 mana for a 2-power menacer with upside. It can't block.
So, like, if they don't deal with your unblockable creature, then they're dying, and that's great. If they eventually have to deal with your skeleton, then you get Demonic Tutor on a permanent that you can then, I don't know, I'll have to bring up Luris every time.
Bring it back
But, you
with
know,
Luris.
God, the first time you sack it, you find your Luris so that you can replay it and keep going. This card rules.
Yeah, I like this card for a bunch of
Yeah.
reasons.
So we've obviously given the use case of an aggressive deck with upside. This is a demonic tutor. Can we treat it as such? Like, are you looking to sacrifice your own 2/1 so you have a tutor that is in points or something like that, or are we looking for this as like an aggressive, maybe lower end mid range deck that maybe also gets a DT later on?
I think you can evaluate this with mid-range in mind as well, but I do think a primary win condition of your deck needs to be turning creatures sideways.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's no defensive utility from this.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, you're all in. Those bones better be rattling.
I think you can still consider it in like the Sandy B situation where or any kind of aristocrats, like if the I'm not saying necessarily this goes in aristocrats, obviously, but anytime when you have threshold of sacrifice outlets so that you can reliably get the demonic tutor, that's great. If you're playing it for in a situation where you reliably get the demonic tutor, I think it's fine on rate, because the two sets of 2 mana can be done on different turns. But yeah, it shines the most where you actually want to attack with the skeleton.
So, next up, Nelly.
We want to talk about Homicide Investigator. So again, I'll say I'm looking to play this one in a black aggressive deck. It's 1 and a black for a 2/2 human detective. Whenever 1 or more non-token creatures you control die, investigate. This ability triggers only once each turn. And this doesn't say other non-token creatures, so at the very base rate, unless you're getting hit by Path or Swords, Homicide Investigator can smash in, trade with their 3/2 for 2 because your opponents can be playing better cards than you, and then you get and then you get a clue token. But if instead you just want to play this and then charge with the rest of your creatures, maybe it's even bad attacks, like you're making bad trades, getting into a bit of damage, but you're turning your terrible creatures into clue tokens. I like that for me too. And then it says only once each turn, so we're not comboing. Like, it's not going in a deck where it's going to go infinite or anything. But this is just kind of like, this is just fair. Like, this is just okay magic. You guys have any other places you want to see the detective?
Kind of.
Yeah.
So there exists this new world of decks that Wheeler and I have been experimenting with, of like Aristoscraps and Tokens Matter.
Artifacts.
Well, we've been talking about like the food fight deck, and I've long been wanting to build sort of like old Rutstein deck.
Right.
So it works in a lot of the different colors. You get a lot of incidental tokens like Tireless Tracker, Tireless Provisioner are the best examples, but treasures, clues, food, whatever. And like picture this with Cat Oven.
Yeah.
Or something like
Or
that,
Blood
right?
Gas Skull Clamp. Right.
Right, yeah. And again, not necessarily a combo like kill them on the spot, but you're doing these little actions and just accruing more and more value each time. And I don't know if this is good enough to make the cut, but this definitely goes in your toolkit of these little cards that just give you just that little bit more value on these engine interactions that you're already doing.
Yeah.
I don't know because I haven't built the deck yet, but I got my eye on you, Homicide Investigator.
Okay.
Great.
All right, the last card we're going to talk about in black, only 3 cards.
Yeah, but they're good ones.
Yeah.
Yep, is
okay.
The Long Goodbye. This is a 2-mana instant for 1 and a black. It is uncounterable. Destroy target creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. This kills Oko. This kills Wrenn and 6. This kills a lot of stuff, which I like a lot. It's a little bit restrictive, but this is another top tier black removal. Now, I think the only downside with this is black has gotten a lot of really good removal lately. And so you're going to have to pick exactly what it is that you want to kill. But you've got options now. You've got so many options now.
I think I still include Eliminate in a lot of Black X mid-range to control decks that are looking to have a certain amount of removal. that aren't dipping into like white. Like if I'm like black, white, blue, or whatever,
Yeah.
maybe I don't go as deep as playing Eliminate as a card, but I would play this because Uncounterable is huge. And if I am playing Eliminate, I don't think this card necessarily replaces it. I think I just play both.
Interesting.
I'm on cutting Eliminate for this just because I'm really tight on my removal slots. Like I don't like to play a lot of spells that are reactive in my black decks, usually just because I'm trying to be proactive most of the time. But I get what you're saying too. I've been playing Eliminate for years.
You got to be. Yeah, I don't play this anything like too aggressive, but
Very quickly remind people what Eliminate does.
so look at Long Goodbye
Mm-hmm.
and then cover up the Can't Be Countered. It's just 2 mana in black, destroy target creature, planeswalker, mana value 3 or less. Worth noting that the 2 most infuriating planeswalkers of the format both cost 4, as well as some of the scariest creatures in the game.
Comet and Boo.
Comet and Boo being the planeswalkers. And, you know, if I think of... if you tell me to think of a creature that I'm scared of, I immediately think of Seasoned Dungeoneer, which this card cannot kill.
No, but it does get the other white one.
Yes,
it does.
White
Yeah.
Plume.
Yeah,
Yep.
White
Does
Plume
get white
dies.
plume. And it kills like obviously Ragavan. Or,
Yeah, I think this card's
Yeah.
like
You know,
top
birds.
card in the set for sure.
Yeah, it's still great, even though it doesn't deal with all of your problems.
Yes.
All right, moving on to red. Wheeler.
Connecting the dots. 1 in red for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks, you exile the top card of your library face down and pay 1 in a red, discard your hand, sacrifice Connecting the Dots, put all cards exiled with Connecting the Dots into their owner's hands. So this turns everything into a little electric tomato.
Bowhead Courier. Yeah.
It's it's Bomat Courier, except the exile is all stored under this card, not the creatures, which is appealing because then if they're not killing your creatures, I don't even need to draw more cards. I've just got creatures.
Oh my god, I just realized it says whenever a creature you control attacks.
Yeah, not 1 or more.
Not whenever you attack with 1 or more
Yeah.
creatures. Okay.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
card. I was initially a little low on this card because much like Assemble the Players, right? Including this card in an aggressive red deck means like you have to cut something.
Yep.
I don't even know if I want to cut like a Volcanic Hammer for this or like what am I doing? I'm not cutting creatures, but I think I'll cut something for this. This card I don't think this is like red deck wins necessarily. Like maybe, but like RDW is like perfect already. Maybe if you're the prowess variant with some of the other cards that we're about to talk about, but the pump spells and more, you play the baubles and like Thermo Alchemist and stuff. Although this card doesn't synergize with Thermo Alchemist,
Right.
but you get what I mean. Like it can get something out of casting cheap non-creature spells, and will gladly take a restock. Every creature.
Yeah, I think if you're playing Monastery Swift Spear in your deck, you might want to try this. Like at least jam it on a weekly. Like I think probably red deck wins could play it.
I love this version of Red's card advantage. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're... how many people are still playing Light Up the Stage?
Oh, everybody.
Right?
All the red players.
Yeah, like 1 mana, exile 3. Red-white version is in... Pardon me?
2. You exile 2.
Exile 2.
Oh, pardon
2
me.
off the
Yeah.
top, yeah.
And then, what is it from Kaldheim? Invasion of the Scalds or something like that?
Showdown of the Skulls.
Showdown of the Scalds. God, I love that card. God, that card kills people.
Yeah.
So, like, don't sleep on these exile effects because it's a significant amount of card advantage. And these even go to your hand.
Yeah.
I could even see this in a deck that is any deck that's jamming 4th Aerolingus. Even if it's not a deck that has like a ton of creatures or doesn't do a ton of early attacking, because the potential for like redrawing 7 is there, like off of just 1 or 2 combat steps, right? Like if you're like a heavy mid range deck with expensive cards in it, and you're able to just attack more than once, like you can draw many cards.
The ability for this card to replace not just itself, but any other cards that maybe you have to discard from your hand is pretty... it's easy to fulfill that requirement. Yeah.
Shall we move on?
Let's talk about Crime Novelist. 2 into red for a 1/3 Goblin Bard. Whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Crime Novelist and add a red mana. Like... what? I don't know. like, do we need to go? This has combo with me written all over it. It goes infinite with like some other cards we've talked about today. Makes your treasures add 2 mana instead of 1. Like,
Now, notably, it's not a sack outlet itself.
Sure.
That's important, right?
It does have 3 toughness and isn't legendary. Like, it costs 3. I don't know. I think we'd still be talking about this card if it cost 5. Like, it just this triggered ability. It's too much for me. I can't.
Do you want my hot take?
Yeah, take it. Tell me it's bad, please.
Yeah, I don't think this card's playable.
Good. I'm glad.
All right, it ties into the whole. I don't think this card's necessary.
Okay.
Where the artifact decks are already pretty. They're a smooth engine, right? They're this machine, not just for thematic purposes, but also that everything just like ties into each other. So like the card that we were talking about before, the Gadgeteer,
Right.
where you cast artifact, make more artifact, and artifacts become cheaper, or the activated abilities. Like all of those work. If you already have your artifacts in play, the Gadgeteer's doing something. If you play the Gadgeteer and then play subsequent artifacts, if they are cheaper and therefore probably less impactful, you are going to build up more artifacts that refill your hand to maybe get to your gas, right? This card just, you need to specifically have something that sacrifices artifacts, and you need to have a use case for this mana. And when I think about the 2 main ways that you sacrifice artifacts, Krark Clan Ironworks doesn't need any help being broken. And then Arcbound Ravager decks don't want to include too many non-artifact cards. And like Arcbound Ravager also just doesn't need any help being broken, right? This card feels unnecessary and vulnerable to me.
Okay.
That's my read on it.
I hope you're right. I was expecting this to make the Krark Clan Ironworks decks better, as well as just like incidentally being like a 3 mana 6/9 in decks that have treasures.
Yeah.
So I'm worried about that, and I don't know. I'll probably experiment with it, but if it turns out that my read of this card being a menace is completely, hasty, like if it was too quick, then I would love to find out that this card's not going to kill me.
I'm excited too.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm nervous.
Let's
for
kill
Prime
Wheeler with
Lawless.
it.
Okay,
Sure.
Great. Sounds good. All right, next card, Serge.
All right, next up we have the Demand Answers. I gotta say, a lot of the cards in this set are just fun to say.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of feels like the D&D set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
AFR a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, Demand Answers is a 2 mana instant for 1 and a red. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sack an artifact or discard a card to draw 2 cards. This is another great copy of Tormenting Voice or anything else in
Thrill
there.
of
Real possibility, deadly
Yeah.
dispute.
Now, this is a constructed classic, especially if you are an Arcbound Phoenix player. You're like, give me more copies of this. Am I thinking of the right card? You both tilted your heads like we're weird.
Yeah.
Arclight
like 60.
Phoenix.
Arclight
Phoenix. Yeah, and 60 card constructed. Yeah.
Yeah, and I haven't quite seen these style of effects pop up as much in our format. The closest deck you'd see to something that would care about something like this would be Is It Spells? That's playing maybe some of the Spell Drakes or the Young Peasies and stuff like that. It's cool that it also has Sacrifice an Artifact as an additional cost to it. It draws 2, but I like this style better in these like very tight 60 card constructed decks than in a 100 card singleton.
If you have that Pyromancer from Bro, that card loves this thing. What's that called? Iconoclast?
Third Path Iconoclast.
Third Path Iconoclast, yeah.
Yeah, because it generates artifacts.
Yeah.
But otherwise, move on.
Sure.
Yeah. Fugitive Codebreaker? Yeah, we did it. All right. 1 and a red for a 2/1 Goblin Rogue with prowess and haste. Could stop right there and I'd be okay.
I'm in. Sold.
Then it has Disguise, with the Disguise cost being 5 and a red, and this cost is reduced by 1 for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. When Fugitive Codebreaker is turned face up, discard your hand and then draw 3 cards. So this style of effect, or this kind of cost reduction, has popped up before on cards like Bedlam Reveler,
Yep.
most recently Hearth Elemental from WoW. And they've mostly been bad to, well, I can technically get away with playing this and probably still do well at the event as long as I draw this only occasionally. And then I
thought
get
you
to
told
say,
me that I was gonna like Earth Elemental because I was all like poo-poo on it, and you're like, no, it's great. It's a 1-mana 4/5. Wasn't that you?
I mean, I do think Hearth Elemental is much better than Bedlam Reveler, just because that one, all cards with adventure are just much better than they look.
Sure.
But this one has, and much like Hearth Elemental, this one just has a use case that can ignore the disguise cost,
Yeah.
and it's totally reasonable. But like if you play this on 3 in your red deck, like you just draw this late, or you just play this on turn 3 and you're like, I don't want my opponent to be able to profitably trade up, or like with their bolt or whatever. That's totally fine. You just have a 2/2 ward 2. And then you get to disguise it, draw some cards. It's great. Again, you just need to pay this as a 2-mana 2/1 with prowess and haste. And it's good enough for me.
It's also a goblin.
Yeah.
Its creature types are quite relevant.
What if your Swift Spear was also a Bedlam Reveler, right? You know? Look, we figured it out.
Really?
Let's talk about Krenko, Baron of Tin Street. A 3-mana 3/3 legendary goblin. For 2 in a red, you get a 3/3 haste with tap, sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on each goblin you control, and whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay red. If you do, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. It gains haste until end of turn. So this is a really interesting goblin lord. It wants you to have artifacts lying around so you can make your goblins bigger, but then if you do have artifacts to sacrifice, or if they die from some other reason, you get 1/1 red goblins. Notably, it says whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard, not just your own. So if your opponent has treasure tokens they're sacrificing, or if they're, Lord forbid, they're doing the Kirkland Ironworks thing, you're going to be making a bunch of extra goblins. Worst case scenario, it's a Boggart Ram Gang, right? 3-mana 3/3 haste. Yes, it's legendary, but it has haste, so like that kind of deals with the Krakus thing a little bit. I think certainly if you can handle sacrificing an artifact in your goblin deck, you'll include it for sure. I did ask local goblin expert whether Tim
How many
McDinnis,
artifacts are playing?
well, whether he was excited for this one or not. I had to ask him. He's like, I don't know. There might be some sort of artifacty goblin build now that's possible. I'm not sure otherwise if this gets into like regular goblins, but
Hold on.
it's a really interesting card.
Let's go back to like OG Zendikar Caw-Blade style. Remember, there was a 1-mana sorcery, sacrifice an artifact to make 3 1/1 goblin
Kuldotha
tokens.
Yeah, they made
Rebirth?
another one of those recently.
Kuldotha Rebirth,
there
right?
are 2 of them
So
now.
maybe
Love
there
that deck.
is a goblins sacrifice artifacts matter deck out there somewhere.
Yeah.
We got 3 cards now.
Yeah. What do you think, Wheeler? Is this going to see any play?
I'm not super convinced,
Okay.
but I'm Lelia pilled, so who knows?
Fair. All right, let's move on, Serge.
All right, next up we have the Pyrotechnic Performer, 2-mana 3/2 Viashino Assassin for 1 in a red. It has Disguise for a single red pip, and whenever the performer or another creature you control is turned face up, that creature deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. And I think this gives us sort of the same play pattern we were talking about earlier. You can play this. Its vanilla stats are ahead of the curve. 2-mana 3/2 is fantastic. Or if you want to play it a turn later because you got more mana, you can protect itself. The ward really changes this. And I think the other thing that I need to acknowledge is one of the worst sets I've ever played personally are the ones that involve Morph. I have a really hard time both evaluating the cards and knowing when to use them resource-wise because it does give so much flexibility. In this way, it kind of turns these into like modal cards now, which is kind of cool. So, yeah, do you want your 2-mana 3/2 to also just do 3 damage when it flips?
Sure.
Kind of
Yeah.
cool, right?
Yeah, why
Seems
not?
solid, right?
Play it wherever you can find room on your curve.
Yeah.
Hey, do you have a deck with your Unyielding Gatekeeper already in the deck, but you have red in that deck? Hey, maybe you can get your opponents to get tricked into thinking this is your Gatekeeper.
Yeah.
All right, Wheeler, take us home.
Vengeful Tracker? Oh, come on.
So, sorry, can you read that whole card there, bud?
Yeah. 1 and a red for a 2/2 human detective. Whenever an opponent sacrifices an artifact, Vengeful Tracker deals 2 damage to them. This feels a little targeted. I don't remember putting this on the list.
Yeah, I might have snuck it in there last minute. I noticed that it wasn't on your list, and I saw it and thought, wow, it's Auriok Salvager's least favorite card in the entire metagame, or in the entire game.
Okay. So if you are just playing Canadian Highlander against a random assortment of people with a variety of decks, I wouldn't recommend playing this card.
It's a top 8 card.
But I will say, yes, it's a top 8 card. This
Yeah.
is well, unfortunately not this year's top 8.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm old daddy's washed up.
This is a mean card.
This
isn't
is
a fun card.
This is you have a couple of people playing like Welder or Academy
Yeah.
or Eggs in your metagame, and you
or that food deck.
yeah, or the
food deck
I mean,
itself.
honestly,
Wait,
like the
Joke's on you, food gains 3 life.
the floor being a 2-mana 2/2 is just like fine. Like red decks, you got to pressure sometimes. You know, there's a really good burn pilot locally that was playing Goblin Bushwhacker in their burn deck for a long time, and they just cast it on 1. Sometimes they just play it on
Sure,
1. It's
right,
like,
yeah.
why aren't you saving it? It's like, hey, you need a threat.
You gonna
Yeah.
block this before turn 4? If not, it's a lightning bolt.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
I know what you're playing over there. You don't have any creatures that cost
Yeah.
less than 6 mana.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, with that, friends, we're going to call it here for part 1 of our set review. As always, if you think we missed any cards, if you just want to talk about your opinions of the set, let us know in the comments down below. We want to remind you that everything we do is brought to you by you with your support over the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. I've been Serge, joined today by Nelson.
Hey, I was here.
We got a Wheeler.
I can't believe you added Vengeful Tracker.
Huge shout out to James on Tech and to our wonderful editing team for putting this together. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you at part 2. Bye-bye.